right, so this next one I titled Practicing Off-Leash for Better On-Leash.
Okay.
All right. Let me check this guy off here. All right. So I did a lesson the other day with Lily the Lab.
Oh.
Lily's a former board and train. She was here 2 months ago, 2.5 months ago, something like that.
Yeah.
Great dog. Whatever. She's kind of like a psycho yellow lab owned by a really, really nice lady, right? Whatever.
Isn't that how it always goes?
So whatever. So we've been doing some follow-up sessions with them, right? Things are going really great. We did a follow-up session a couple of days ago, and kind of went to the park, went to Edgewater, and she was like, well, what do you want to work on today? She's like, I don't know. She's doing pretty good. I just want to kind of see what I can do to keep moving in the right direction, which is a great mindset to have, right? When you think things are going good still, make sure that's when you really get the second set of eyes on you to see where you could fine-tune things. Because here's the trap people fall into sometimes, is when their dog's behavior goes from totally unmanageable to pretty good, or I should just say better, right? We become okay with better, which I'm glad things are better, but the problem is better in a lot of cases is still pretty sloppy to most people's standards.
True.
Right?
Yeah.
So to most people's standards, better is still sloppy, but it's so much better than it was before that we're okay with it. But because it's sloppy and unclear to the dog still, because the parameters aren't like perfect, it generally will deteriorate pretty quickly over the course of the next couple of months.
Yeah.
Because those parameters aren't as good as they could be, right? So whatever. So let's just say we started walking and the walking was so much better, but it wasn't like perfect.
Yeah.
Right? So we're walking around, and the biggest thing that I noticed was she was still using her leash a little too much, right? And I find a lot of people are guilty of this. They're walking the dog, and it's just like a teeny bit of leash pressure here, teeny bit of leash pressure there, and that pressure was constantly like stopping the dog right before the dog made the mistake and causing the dog to kind of fix itself, but it never really learned where the boundary was because we weren't allowing the dog to fully make the mistake so we can correct for it and get past it, right?
Yeah.
So here's what we did. We actually took the dog off of the leash and we worked the walking totally off leash, right?
Oh, okay.
And this is something I do with a lot of clients. If you're scared that the dog is going to like take off or you don't fully trust the dog's off-leash reliability, you could do the same concept with a long line, like dragging on the ground or something like that for a little extra safety. In this dog's case, we weren't worried about that. She's pretty reliable off-leash. We just wanted to tighten this positioning up. And what happened is because the leash was not there, the dog made the mistakes.
Yeah.
Where the dog would make the mistakes, and we had no crutch we could fall back on to stop the dog from making the mistake, aside from let them commit to making the mistake, give the correction for it.
Yeah.
What we found is over the course of like 3 minutes and 3 or 4 mistakes the dog made that the dog would not have made before, the walk went from better to literally perfect. What are you doing over there? What are you doing over there? So the walk went from like better to perfect. And when I say perfect, I got the receipts. I'll show you. I'll show you.
He's got the receipts.
Look at this. Look at this. See this?
Oh, yeah.
That is a perfect off-leash heel right there at the park. Tons of distractions.
Oh, yeah. A little parasailing.
Literally perfect.
Wow.
Right? Love it.
Yeah, that's great.
Okay. So what we did is we walked around for a little bit off leash, right? Then we came to a stop. I was like, what'd you think of that? She was like, that was great. That was really good. Felt awesome. I think she even trusted the dog much more than she thought she was going to trust the dog, right? So then I was like, all right, now why is the dog so much better right now? And it clicked, right? She was able to understand. Okay, it was the leash. It was the way I was handling the leash. I didn't quite get where I needed to get with it, right?
Yeah.
I was, still giving a little too much help with it and stuff like that. I was like, all right, so now we're going to put the leash back on. But you have to walk her with the same mentality, right? So you have to give her the ability to make the mistakes. You can't rely back on that leash. So we put the leash back on. Boom, perfect walk.
Nice.
Right? So I say this because there's a reason why we train everything to an off-leash standard, right? We train everything to an off-leash standard because until we're in a place where the dog is so clear with what the expectations of them are that we don't need any crutches to fall back on to help the dog through these types of things, right? And we could argue, well, the e-collar is a crutch. The e-collar is not a crutch because if we're training properly to an off-leash standard, we shouldn't really be using it. Right. So like when we were walking, we used it initially to train the boundaries with things, but then we went for the walk and we didn't need to give a single correction with it. Right. Yeah. If you were using the e-collar every 4 seconds on the walk to get the dog to stay in position, but the dog was never learning where they needed to be without the need of any sort of like physical help or prompt or correction or anything like that, then we could argue that that's a crutch. But in this type of context, it's not because we're not actively using it. Right. The dog is understanding how to do it without the need of any of that help. Right.
Yeah.
But until we have the dog to a place where they can respond perfectly without the need of any sort of consequences, without the need of any sort of physical prompts or anything like that, then the dog doesn't really clearly understand things the way that they need to, and we need to train things further to that point. It's not that these dogs have to be off-leash all the time. It's not that because we have the dog off-leash right there, I'm like, well, you have to take your dog for off-leash walks all the time. We just trained off-leash so she could really see where the last couple holes were in her training so that when she put the leash back on, she could feel confident that she actually got things where she needed to get.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's in anything. You kind of got to push what you think is the boundary sometimes, and that leash is what she thought, oh, well, this is good. This is what I got to use all the time.
Yeah. It's the next hurdle, right? It's like some people will say like, when you're working on personal development or whatever it may be, that some people will like plateau off at a certain point with things. And the only way to get past that plateau, and sometimes you hit this point, and it could be with anything, right? Actually, I'll use a more clear example. They say, like when I used to play guitar a lot, right? They would say when you're practicing, sometimes if you're trying to make too incremental of improvements with things, so like really, let's say you're trying to work on a faster lick, right? And you're going like 1 beat per minute faster each time. One faster, one faster, one faster. Sometimes you'll plateau off at a certain point where it's like you get to a speed where it's like really hard to do and you could almost do it, but you could never quite like perfect it at that speed, right? They say sometimes you need to challenge yourself in a bigger jump to kickstart the next level, right? So if you're going up 1 beat per minute faster each time, maybe you go up 5 or 10 beats per minute faster to force yourself into that next gear so that when you bring it back down, it feels easier for you to do and you could finally get past that hurdle. So I look at dog training, or I look at like improvements to dog training very similarly sometimes to both the owner as well to the dog, right? So to her, she hadn't quite perfected on-leash heeling, so why would she jump to off-leash heeling, right? But to me, jumping to the off-leash heeling will force her into a different, more attentive state of mind that will get her past that jump, so when we get back to the on-leash heeling is even better.